Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Curse Painter by Jordan Rivet, narrated by Marnye Young. Chapter 1. Rough bark scratched Briar's legs as she climbed the maple tree next to the finest house in Sparrow Village. Her paint satchel swung against her hip, the jars inside jingling faintly. She tried not to look down. The ground was way too far away already. Afternoon shadows advanced from the woods behind the property, swallowing up the stable and creeping toward the whitewashed house. Briar held her breath as she climbed past the expensive glass windows. The house's inhabitants, servants included, should still be away at the summer fair. Hopefully, the place was empty, and would stay empty until Briar finished the job. She edged along a stubby branch jutting toward the second floor of the house. The limb creaked, and the leafy canopy rustled threateningly. Trying to ignore the sounds, Briar wrapped her legs around the end of the branch, opened a jar of brown ochre paint, and selected a long-handled brush from the bundle in her satchel. Then she braced herself against the clay-shingled roof and began the painstaking work of painting a curse. Stroke by stroke, the image of a fine house with a peaked roof took shape. The oil paint glistened as it spread from the horsehair brush, brown ochre standing out against the whitewashed boards. The familiar smell of linseed oil soothed Briar's nerves, and she relaxed into her task. She'd practiced the complex design on canvas to prevent mistakes. Each brushstroke required precision and a steady hand, though that got harder the longer she balanced precariously between earth and sky. She hadn't planned on climbing any trees for the job. She'd spotted a ladder when she'd scouted the place a few days ago, and had designed the curse for a shadowy spot beneath the eaves. If she painted it too close to the ground, the gardeners would notice and wipe away the paint before the jinx took effect. More importantly, they would know who was responsible. Briar had already given the local authorities too many reasons to distrust her. Unfortunately, the ladder had been missing when she'd arrived to carry out the job, and the maple tree leaning aggressively toward the house had been her only alternative. As Briar painted, knots jabbed her thighs through her green wool skirt, and twigs poked into her thick hair. She clutched the clay shingles, trying to ignore the dizzying drop below. Painting curses took concentration. This one wasn't nearly as dangerous as some she knew, but she couldn't afford any errors. She finished the shape of the house and used blue smalt to add windows, their placement roughly the same as the windows on the real house. Cursing objects was always simpler than cursing people. To affect a human, Briar had to paint an item of clothing they wore often, or touch a cursed canvas or stone to their skin, long enough for the spell to stick. Getting caught was all too easy, but many curses could be painted right onto inanimate targets, assuming she could reach them without breaking her neck. This particular curse wouldn't hurt anyone, and it was the most interesting piece of magic Briar had executed in months, her perilous position making it all the more stimulating. Her blood heated in her veins, and her fingers tingled with magic, with the sizzling rush of creation. It was going to be a good one. She could feel it. The local blacksmith had doubted her abilities when he'd hired her for the job. Her clients rarely believed she could live up to her reputation at the sight of her paint-smudged hands and humble clothes.
"I've heard downright perplexing things about you and your profession, but you look awful young," the blacksmith had said at their furtive meeting in his smithy the week before. "Can you really help?"
"Possibly." Briar pushed her dark, frizzy hair out of her eyes, poised to flee at any hint that it was a setup. It wouldn't be the first. "I hear you want to curse Master Winton."
"Aye, the merchant. 5 weeks I spent on a bleedin' suit of armor at his bidding, and he refused to pay fair wage. Claimed it wasn't ornate enough. I have young'uns to feed."
"Have you gone to the sheriff?"
"That loiter sack?" The blacksmith spit in the dirt beside his anvil. "He and Winton are close personal friends."
Briar took a horsehair paintbrush out of her satchel and twirled it between her fingers, the bristles tickling her damp palm. "Where is the armor now?"
On display in Lord Barden's manor." The blacksmith eyed the paintbrush nervously. "Winton claimed it wasn't worth the price, then gave it to his lordship himself as a bleedin' present. Now I'm out the coin and the steel." "And you want revenge?" The blacksmith glanced at the summer-bright path outside his smithy and lowered his voice. "It's not just for me, you see. I have daughters. I want to show them we don't take abuse from rich bastards who think they can get away with it." Briar noted the blacksmith's frayed trousers, the patches on his boots. A wreath of wildflowers hung on the smithy door, the petals wilting in the heat. She imagined the little girls collecting the blooms and clumsily tying them together to brighten their father's workplace. The blacksmith's daughters would have less to eat that winter because of Winton's greed. Briar liked jobs that brought a little justice for ordinary folks, or at least payback. She tucked her paintbrush behind her ear and stuck out a hand. "I'm in. Tell me about Master Winton's house." The blacksmith had described the property situated on a spacious lot at the edge of Muir Woods, 2 stories tall, expensive clay shingles, clear glass windows, and no ladders, apparently. Perching in the maple tree was becoming less comfortable by the minute. Briar switched from blue smalt to malachite green and began adding vines to the image. She would twine them around the painted house as thick as ivy, and add colorful flowers at key points along their lengths. The curse would make the pitch sealing the house against moisture slowly disintegrate. By the coldest months of winter, the roof would leak, and wind would howl through the cracks. She would make Master Winton pay, though he would never know his ill fortune was a result of his cheating ways. Briar was proud of the curse's subtlety, but the intricate vines were taking too long. She should have prepared an easier design. Her arms ached from bracing herself against the roof, and the distance between the tree and the wall seemed to grow with each stroke. She began to sweat, the paintbrush slipping in her grasp. As she paused to open a jar of yellow ochre, she detected movement out of the corner of her eye and froze. Someone was there. No, not now. She held her breath, struggling against a powerful urge to run. She couldn't be caught, but she couldn't leave the curse as it was either. Without the final stroke, the little image beneath the eaves would be no more than a pretty picture. She peered through the thick maple leaves, hardly daring to blink. The grassy expanse between the house and the woods was deserted, except for the creeping afternoon shadows. Yet she felt someone watching her. A horse snorted inside the stable, and magpies chattered in the trees, but she detected no movement, no other sound. Telling herself she was jumping at shadows, Briar resumed her work. The jars rattled in her satchel as she switched between yellow ochre and vermilion, adding flowers to the vines. Curse painting required a strict stroke order, and she couldn't rush the process, but her brush kept slipping as she juggled 2 colors and her awkward position. She put the paintbrush in her teeth and clenched her legs tighter around the branch so she could grip the vermilion jar with both hands. The lid was stuck. Knots dug deeper into her thighs as she teetered on the stubby tree branch. Movement again. A flicker of blue. This time, the shadows took on shape and substance. She wasn't imagining it after all. Someone was standing next to Winton's stable. She could just make him out through the leaves. A tall man in an indigo coat looking right at her. Briar's heartbeat spiked, and her limbs quivered, making it harder than ever to keep her perch. She wanted to scramble out of the tree and run for it, but she didn't know what the stranger would do if she tried. She stared at him, as motionless as a sparrow facing a tree snake. Seconds ticked past. The tall man didn't leave the shelter of the stable. His shock of blonde hair was visible even in the shadows, and he held something long and thin in his hand. Could he be Master Winton's gardener? The merchant was a nasty fellow, according to the blacksmith, but would his man really stand back and allow him to be hexed? Briar could be planning to burn the house to the ground with the family inside, for all the gardener knew. Her legs shook hard enough to rustle the branches. She would attract the attention of passers-by if she kept on like that. She couldn't do anything about the stranger. She had to finish the job.
The jar of vermilion popped open at last. Briar rushed the last few strokes of the curse and messed up 2 flowers. She repaired them with a few quick flicks of the hard edge of the paintbrush, sweat dropping from her forehead to the earth below. 1 more petal, and the curse would be complete. She dipped the brush in the jar and brought it, dripping red, to the wall. The branch groaned beneath her as she stretched toward the farthest corner of the painting for the final stroke. Suddenly, the stranger stepped out of the shadows. He held a longbow, an arrow already nocked. The action startled her, and her hand slipped, leaving a long red slash down the curse painting. Briar gasped and scrambled for more paint to counteract the slash. Before she could fix it, there was a loud crack, and the branch gave way beneath her. Leaves and twigs lashed Briar's face as she tumbled from the tree and hit the ground hard. Paint jars crunched beneath her. She stared up at the shivering branches, winded and shocked. She had fallen. She had actually fallen. Leaves drifted above her, floating on the late summer breeze. "Don't just lie there. You'll be caught for sure." She sucked in a breath and forced herself to sit up. Paint and shards of glass covered her shirt. As she brushed them away, pain shot through her wrist. Her left arm had taken the brunt of the impact. She tried to rotate her wrist, and agony lanced through her. She clenched her teeth to keep from vomiting, black spots dancing before her eyes. If her arm was broken, she wouldn't be able to work for months. She couldn't afford such an injury. She would lose her home, everything she'd built from the remnants of her old life. She should have abandoned the job at the first sign of trouble. A creaking sound reminded her of the precise curse marred with a broad slash of vermilion. The house gave a deep, ominous groan. She sifted through her curse-painting knowledge, trying to work out what that slash was likely to do, and how soon. Every stroke had meaning, and that one. The creaking came again, loud and insistent. Briar realized what was about to happen and leapt to her feet. She didn't have much time. She snatched up as many broken jars as she could, shoveling the oily glass into her satchel with her good hand, then bolted away from the house. Running jostled her injured arm, and tears filled her eyes. The stranger in the indigo coat retreated into the shadows as she darted past. He looked young, with a high forehead, sharp mouth, and dark, quirked eyebrows. The longbow remained undrawn, and he didn't try to stop her. Briar reached the shelter of the woods just as a roaring, squealing sound startled the magpies from their nests. She looked back. The house teetered, 2 stories of whitewashed timber and fine clay shingles swaying like laundry in a stiff breeze. Iron nails began to ping out of the boards one by one, disappearing in the long grass around the house. "Don't!" More nails loosened, fell, scattered. "Please, no!" But it was too late. The final nail popped free, and the house gave a moan like a dying animal. The walls buckled, glass windows bursting, clay shingles cracking and sliding. Then the entire structure collapsed with a thunderous crash. Dust billowed into the sky, and splinters scattered across the grass. Briar crouched behind a craggy oak tree, horror consuming her. "This can't be happening." Magpies wheeled overhead, cawing and scolding from a safe distance. The dust cleared slowly, unveiling the damage from her botched curse. Somewhere beyond the stable, the stranger gave a low whistle. Nothing was left of the house but a pile of rubble beside a triumphant maple tree. A whimper escaped Briar's lips. She had worked so hard to set up a new life there, a fresh start peddling quiet, nonlethal curses. Yes, her work was illegal, but she tried not to hurt anyone. She'd even dared hope she might make amends for the things she'd done before. This would destroy her efforts, drawing attention she couldn't afford, maybe enough to attract the notice of the people she'd left behind. No. She refused to contemplate that possibility. She would run again. She would start over as many times as it took to keep them from catching up with her. Trying not to rub her paint-covered clothes on anything, she pulled her satchel to her chest and fled into the woods. Archer emerged from the shadows of the stable and admired the splintered ruin. He had never seen a curse painter work so meticulously, especially from 15 feet in the air. nor produce such dramatic results. Not a single whitewashed board or pane of glass remained intact. Willem Winton's fine house looked much better bashed into tiny pieces. Archer wondered what the old charlatan had done to make that slip of a girl want to curse the place into oblivion. Who cares why she did it? He slung his bow onto his back at a jaunty angle. It was brilliant work. Archer had heard a curse painter lived in those parts, but he hadn't expected to meet her there. He just wanted to engage in a little casual burglary while he was in the neighborhood. Instead, he'd stumbled upon a better prize than gold candlesticks and Mistress Winton's jewels. That girl could be the answer to all his problems. He turned toward the woods and whistled a high, piercing note. A large dog loped through the trees, shadows dappling its short gray fur. Archer knelt beside the dog and scratched the folds on its neck. "What do you think, Sheriff? Can you follow her for me?" The dog whined and rubbed his wrinkly head against Archer's knee, smearing slobber on his breeches. Then he trotted over to the maple tree to sniff out the girl's scent among the broken paint jars. Archer picked up a large glass shard covered in green paint and pocketed it. The curse painter had worked with impressive stealth, at least until the end. He only noticed her perched in the tree when her luminous eyes caught the light, and she stared at him like a large, frizzy-haired owl. She had such power. The dog looked up, ears pointed like arrowheads, awaiting his master's word. "Ready, Sheriff? Let's go get her." Sheriff howled and set off into the trees. Archer jogged after him, slipping into the woods before anyone could investigate the commotion at the finest ruin in Sparrow Village. Chapter 2. Briar's heart drummed a frantic beat as she raced through Muir Woods, avoiding the village proper. The forest seemed bent on delaying her. She snagged her skirt in blackberry patches and tumbled over roots snaking across the path. By the time she reached the Brittlewin River, sweat dampened her collar, and brambles filled her frizzy hair. She nearly ran straight into the county sheriff and a pair of Lord Barden's retainers on the bridge. They had stopped for a smoke and were jawing about some tavern wench or other, blocking the only route across the Brittlewin. Briar dove behind an abandoned cart before the men looked her way. Hopefully, they couldn't hear her gasps for breath after her mad dash through the woods. The leisurely murmur of their voices mixed with the babble of the river. Smoke curled above their heads, taunting her with its slow drift. Why weren't those three at the summer fair? Sheriff Flynn never missed a chance to preen for a crowd, and the local baron's retainers were almost as bad, strutting about in their ugly mustard-brown surcoats. "Come on now," Briar muttered, worrying at her paint-smudged shirt. "Move along." Sweat crawled down her scalp, and her injured wrist throbbed plaintively. Every minute she expected an uproar from the mess she'd left behind. She needed to keep moving. When the trio finally knocked the ashes from their pipes and ambled toward the village, Briar tore across the bridge and up the road on the other side of the river. She didn't dare look back until she reached the little cottage in the woods she'd been renting for the past few months. She paused at the garden gate to listen for signs of pursuit. The road behind her remained vacant. No angry merchants, no villagers with pitchforks. A breeze shivered through the trees and lifted thin curls of sawdust from the woodpile. She was safe, for now. Briar crossed the garden to the cottage, a snug dwelling of rough-hewn logs with a thatched roof. She unlocked the door, and the familiar aromas of oil paint, wood smoke, and dry thatch welcomed her home. The tension in her body eased a little. Briar loved her cottage. It only had one room, which was sparsely furnished and rough by most standards, but it filled her with a sense of warmth and well-being, unlike the finer chambers she'd occupied growing up. The cottage was the first place where she'd felt she had a chance, not just at a good life, but at being a good person. She was heartsick that she might have to abandon it. Alert for the sound of hoofbeats, Briar hid the broken paint jars and ruined satchel under her bed and stripped off her paint-splattered shirt. Wincing at the pain in her wrist, she bundled the old shirt into the rag basket by the cottage's only chair. and pulled on a crisp white blouse, as if to prove she definitely hadn't been wielding destructive paints that afternoon. She wrapped extra rags around her injured wrist and knotted them with her teeth. Next, she checked her defenses. Small jars of paint and finger-sized brushes carefully concealed around the cottage for emergencies. Under her lumpy pillow, inside the fireplace, above the lintel. She tugged a few rungs out of the ladder-back chair and hid them too. According to the law of holes, the first of the 3 laws of curse painting, a curse applied to an object would affect that object in its entirety, regardless of whether the pieces were intact at the time of painting. Just as a curse painted on a few siding boards could destroy a whole house, a curse on a detached piece of a chair could affect the chair from a distance, providing the pieces weren't apart long enough to be considered separate wholes. Briar switched out the rungs on her chair regularly, just in case she needed to hurl the whole thing at someone. She peeked through the curtained window next to the door. The road to the cottage was empty, and the setting sun bathed the forest in red and gold and deep blue. Soon the shadows would blend into the full dark of night. Could she have escaped the blame for what had happened somehow? Luck rarely worked in her favor, but the stranger in indigo hadn't confronted her, and the authorities wouldn't necessarily connect her to Master Winton or the collapsed house. As long as the blacksmith didn't talk, they might not even think of her. She hadn't destroyed anything bigger than an ale cart within the boundaries of Barden County, and she wasn't the only curse painter powerful enough to bring down a house. Few mages of any kind could do it so efficiently, though. If it hadn't been a complete accident, she would be proud of her work. Briar dropped the curtain and dragged an easel and a half-finished canvas to the center of the room. She occasionally created benign paintings to give away, so no one would question why she bought so much pigment, and always had colorful splatters on her sleeves. Some people in Sparrow Village knew what she was by now, but she tried to make it easier for them to pretend otherwise. She wanted so badly to stay in her little cottage, to finally stop running. Curse painting as a profession wasn't completely illegal, but like all forms of magic, it was carefully regulated. Mages were required to study in expensive schools and register with a hall of cloaks in faraway High Lure. If they passed their studies, licensed art mages received tattoos to track every jinx and spell they performed. Curse painters were usually employed for demolition, mining, and warfare. Ambulatory curses and sleep curses could also bring in a respectable income, providing they weren't used to break other laws, which were numerous. With so many restrictions, most mages, curse painters, voice mages, fortune scribes, even the rare stone crafters, preferred to work directly for the crown and the lords of the peerage. Unlicensed mages of all types still cropped up, performing illegal magic on the cheap and risking prosecution with every job. Voice mages could avoid notice by peddling healing spells and garden variety transformations, and no one worried too much about fortune tellers, but curses were negative by nature. Whether reducing a house to splinters or maiming a romantic rival, it was all too easy for painters to brush the boundaries of legality. Even unlicensed curse painters could avoid notice in their outer counties, though, which was why Briar had gone there to start over, and to hide. She checked outside again. Twilight was falling fast. A large dog loped through the fading light and sniffed around her woodpile. It was as big as a wolf, with meaty shoulders and deep wrinkles enveloping a squashed-looking face. No owner joined the dog, and it soon trotted off into the distance. Briar dropped the curtain and went to hang the kettle over the low-burning coals in her fireplace. A pot of tea would calm her nerves, so she could figure out her next steps. Master Winton would give Sheriff Flynn a list of anyone who might wish him ill. She would have to warn the blacksmith in the morning. She couldn't risk crossing the village tonight. As she stoked the fire, she imagined the din that must surround the place by now. She should have made the curse smaller, so botching it wouldn't have done so much damage. She'd felt the magic in her fingertips, the hot urgency of creation, and she'd gotten carried away. Briar had an almost compulsive need to destroy, something that worried her even more than getting caught. She had walked away from her old life, but she carried part of it with her still. The kettle sang, and she removed it from the flames. Before she could pour her tea, a knock sounded at the door. Archer tapped his boot on the flagstone step outside the curse painter's cottage. It didn't look like the type of place to house an illegal curse business. It was little more than a hovel. The green-curtained windows on either side of the door looked like two wide eyes, and the thatched roof drooped a bit above the door, a lock of hair falling in front of a squat troll's face. The well-kept garden beside the neat woodpile suggested the cottage's occupant looked after the place, but she certainly wasn't wealthy. She couldn't refuse Archer's offer. He was about to make this curse painter rich beyond her wildest dreams, if she ever opened the door. Archer leaned his longbow against the wall and knocked again. Movement fluttered behind the green curtains, a hint of dark hair and white linen.
"Hello in there," he called. "I know you're home."
The sound of careful footsteps filtered through the door. It occurred to him that the curse painter could be preparing a jinx.
"I mean you no harm," he said quickly. "I'd like a word with you."
Still no response. Did she really think pretending she wasn't home was going to work? Archer had important business to discuss. He had no time for games.
"I could come back later," he called through the door. "Maybe with Sheriff Flynn or some of Lord Barden's oafs. I'm sure they'd be very interested in what I saw at Willem Winton's house this afternoon. Or what used to be his house."
A brief silence. Then the door cracked open, and a pair of luminous brown eyes appeared.
"What do you want?"
"Good evening." He gave a bow fit for a duchess.
"I am called Archer. I am an accomplished thief and brigand. I serve the blade, the coin, and the open road. I have come to offer you an opportunity to escape your sordid circumstances and embark on the adventure of a dozen lifetimes."
The girl stared at him, blinking her large, shimmering eyes. It was unsettling, being stared at like that.
"Do you always tell people you're a thief?" she asked at last. "Don't you tell them you're an unlicensed curse painter?"
"Please don't say that so loud." Urgency tinged the girl's voice, though no one was around to hear it. The cottage's location on the quieter side of the Brittlewin River made sure of that.
"I'm not here to hurt you," Archer said. "I have been looking to hire someone with your particular set of skills, and I must say, yours are the most particular I've ever seen."
"I don't work for criminals." She began to shut the door. Archer jammed the toe of his boot into the doorway. He'd misjudged her strength and winced as the door nearly chopped his foot in half.
"I beg your pardon, miss,"
Archer said, eyes watering from the pain.
"But are you not a criminal yourself?"
There was another brief pause in the poorly lit hut. Archer felt like he was speaking to a pair of disembodied eyes floating in the shadows.
"I only accept clients under special circumstances." "Wouldn't you like to hear my circumstances, then?"
The girl ground her teeth, audibly.
"If you'll stop talking about it out here."
She released her hold on the door and stepped back. "You'd better come inside." Archer was surprised. Inviting a stranger into one's home was risky, even in this sleepy country town. But as he ducked beneath the low-hanging lintel, he realized the curse painter was holding an iron kettle, the spout steaming faintly. He was lucky she hadn't thrown it in his face when he stuck his foot in her door. The light from the crackling fireplace gave him a better look at the curse painter. Though rather short, she wasn't quite as young as he had thought, perhaps 18 or 19, only a few years younger than he was. There was a maturity in her bearing that he'd missed when she was clambering around in that maple tree. She wore a white blouse and a green wool skirt, and her dark hair fell around her shoulders in a frizzy cloud. The cottage consisted of one room, with a quilt-covered bed in the corner, a small table, and a ladder-back chair with a few missing rungs. A large easel with a half-finished painting on a stretched canvas occupied the center of the small space. Other paintings leaned against the walls, the images indistinct in the firelight. Archer strode to the easel. The painting depicted a pastoral scene, a little farmhouse at the edge of a field of wheat. Tame work, considering what he'd seen the girl.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?